So it's finally time to go for some scattering work. And as usually, I'm organizing the scene, doing subfolders, general folders for the forest tools, and different parts of the scene for better management. So I'm gonna bring in our first forest tools object. And opening up the forest manager to easily assign meshes and do general stuff, tasks faster. So I'm switching the scatter mode in the forest object to the static mesh. And what it does by default is that it'll spawn inside of our collision cube on the collisions of the objects in this scene. So where they intersect, it's gonna raycast and spawn points on top of that surface. But I'm changing it to the poison sampling, making smaller sampling count. Then I'm gonna pick up this cliff because this mesh doesn't have any collision, and applying some filterings like slope filters, and I'm picking some black alder trees, the forest variants. And one of them is going to be the field variant. I'm assigning the meshes and clicking generate in the forest manager to see them in the viewport. So as you can see, it applied the mesh, but I thought it reduced the quantity quite too much. So I'm upping the max slope filter and the sampling count to have more trees. And then I'm just gonna duplicate the mesh and pick another one and repeat. So yeah, it's that easy. There's nothing really you need to do afterwards. You just pick the mesh, duplicate, pick another mesh, and it'll do everything for you automatically. I'm switching to post tracing to see how the tree is looking in the more physically correct lighting. I'm always checking if I'm good with the density or if it needs to be more dense or less. If they're sticking out too much, if the tree variance is good or not, etc. And also organizing the scene as much as I can. So yeah, I decided to go for the lower max angle and just up the density so that they won't spawn on the steep slopes. And as you can see, even though we're still in post tracing and it's always rendering, when I'm changing the sampling count or any other setting really, it's updating automatically and pretty fast. Now I'm just duplicating this FT object because it's better to work with separate objects than trying to do everything in the same kind of graph. If you're doing everything in the same forest tools and you suddenly need to change only one area of the scene, you won't be able to do it easily. So I'm always duplicating, making sure that I have enough different forest tools objects in areas so that I can change it specifically for that area that I'm working on, and that's it. Then I thought that trees on the foreground to the left are going to be a bit too distracting, so I'm picking this raspberry asset from the Megascans. I'm just gonna increase the hell out of the sampling count to see them. I'm also going to increase the global scale just a little bit, because even though it's true to live scale, from our camera perspective, they're a little bit small, but I'm going to increase it just a tiny bit. Also, this raspberry asset looks a little too pale, and it's the same color everywhere. So I'm using the material function that comes with the forest tools to get the color variation. And I'm also always checking the scene color to make sure that our vegetation looks more or less coherent in terms of colors. Then I'm applying the color randomizer to this object using the map that comes with the forest tools. So it's not going to be an extremely drastic change, but it's just enough to make sure that the colors are not as uniform as you get with the base geometry. And colors are usually never uniform in real world. And again, the same thing, I'm just duplicating the static mesh and applying it to other areas that I think are going to be very visible from the camera. Then I'm changing the clip value of the leaves material to something lower like 0.1 to make sure that Unreal renders it at a distance and not eats up the opacity. Then it's time to work on the landscape itself, on the vegetation there. So I'm using the spline, and in this case it's the forest spline, but you can use whatever spline you want. I'm just drawing the spline as to where I want the trees to be. I'm making a new forest object, the mode to spline, picking up that spline, making sure it has lower density count. And now I'm going to go for the base offset to increase it to make it look less uniform. Then again, I'm just going to apply the trees geometry. And now I'm only using the forest variant because those trees are usually bigger and they're found deep in the forest. Now I'm going through all of the foliage materials and decreasing the opacity mask to 0.1 so that we can still see the foliage from the distance. For some reason, Unreal thinks that if it's opacity, it can just delete the foliage from the distance. So yeah, we can see it now. I'm always looking through the camera to make sure that I only scatter or do things according to the camera perspective. If it's not visible, I'm rarely bothered by doing any of this. Now I thought that those trees are barely visible on the landscape, so I'm removing the project to landscape and just moving the spline upwards to see the trees a little bit better. And now, as you can see, I start to play with lighting again. For me, it's always back and forth with the lighting. Today I like it, tomorrow I don't, because when you look at something for a while, it really makes your eyes be very accustomed to it. So after I closed the project for a bit and looked through mood references again, I'm always finding something to tweak there. And as you can see, I'm trying to figure out if I'm going to go with a regular skylight or not. And it just didn't really work for me. As you can see, you can do quite fine with the lumen scene, but still I wanted to have as good lighting as I possibly could from Unreal. And when you're switching from the past tracing to lumen, especially in shadows, you can see what kind of huge difference it is. So again, I'm deleting the skylight, playing around with the directional light and the intensity of the sky sphere. I'm also making sure that it's not overly saturated, because I want a foggy day and not a bluish daylight. With the fog, it's really all about the 4 settings: extinction scale, view distance, start distance, and scattering distribution. Nothing else really worked, and it's a little bit restrictive as to what you can do with it. But again, I just wanted to see how far I can push the Unreal Engine render by itself, so that'll do. In Nuke, however, you could always push the fog with the gamma to appear less dense, or to make the distribution appear less linear and accumulate only at the distance. In here, it looks like it's always a linear addition of the layering fog, so that you cannot really create something that you want for this specific situation. So I just found some settings that I liked with the fog and decided that this scene was a little bit too dark after editing it. So I'm changing the lighting again, brightening it a little bit, as you can see in here. Adding just a tiny bit of tint to the fog itself to make it a little more visually pleasing and not to be as neutral. And then you can see that right now, when we are not in camera and in post tracing, everything is really blown out and stuff like that. So I'm switching to override the game preview. So now I'm working on the walls, and I'm not going to give you this model. I can just tell you that it's from the Edo Japan Kitbash pack from Kitbash 3D that I reworked and redid using Max and Typeflow. If you want to use the same mesh, you can grab it from their website. As usual, it's just a simple spline S path, project to landscape, use normal direction if needed, and play around with the sampling count to make them fit better. So it's basically duplicate the spline, duplicate the object, relink, repeat. There is nothing really special about it. And here I'm using the forest tools in a way that is contradicting to the forest name. I'm using it as a kind of an array modifier to make the walls. Then when I looked at the real place, at our reference, I saw that our scaling is way off, and that the real area should be a lot smaller, meaning that we need to redo the walls. Even though it's the work that we need to do and redo, and it takes quite a bit of time, it's still a lot easier to do because we have the splines that drive our geometry and not separate objects that we need to tweak one by one, which makes this setup a lot more robust than the traditional workflow. So we can easily make modifications, make it appear smaller or bigger. Like if I were to place these walls by hand and I did need to redo them, oh man, I wouldn't even try to do that. Because it's kind of too much work. But here, this part plays. So you can see how fast it is to redo this kind of thing. So yeah, the reason I'm redoing the splines, doing different splines for different walls, is because for each spline I want to have a different amount of sampling count. So yeah, I'm just redoing it one last time to make sure that it is as flexible as possible, and if I want to change something down the line, I can easily do that. And I'm just applying some basic materials from the mega scans, like wood and stucco and metal for the top part. Even though it's not metal from our distance, it should do. The thing about distance shots is that you need big details. Smaller details are not going to be visible in any case, but the bigger details are going to be extremely important. And right now I'm just picking all of the textures because we're out of texture pool size, and I'm just making sure that the maximum resolution of the textures is not more than 2K, because we really don't see those details. You can also see that I'm applying the same nanite options for all of the foliage in asset actions. Now you can see that I skipped the part where I placed all of these scatter assets. I'm sorry, I just forgot to turn on the recording when I did this. But basically those are the same assets and the same kind of procedure as I did previously. This is not a landscape mode on the forest tool. It's still all spline driven. Everything here is spline driven because I don't want to have huge areas affected by the same kind of forest tool. I want them patched and only in areas that I need, and to be as controllable as possible. Here you can see that I'm placing the grass from the starter pack of the forest tools. Next and final part, I'm going to go over every single object here to show you the outline of settings that I used, the final lighting, the final camera settings, and the final render settings that I used. Now I'm going to go over those little bits of nuke that I did here, because again, I tried to do everything in Unreal Engine, so it's really just about the lens treatment rather than the full-out compositing in Nuke. Those small bushes are actually the same trees that you see on the hills. They just scaled to 0.3 or 0.25 or something like that, and from the distance they look just fine, and that's all that I needed from them. Again, this scale was taken from real place, and I saw that the vegetation around the temple was not as big as trees would usually grow, so I decided that I'm not going to search for any additional bush models, and I'm just going to scatter the same tree, and that's about it. And here's another trick. Because we need to affect large areas, I'm creating patched flowers rather than use individual flower models. I'm going to combine meshes together and use it as a single mesh and scatter that rather than every single little flower. I'm gonna have these patches being scattered on spline on the areas that we need with a distribution map. And as you can see here, I'm applying those patches. I'm making sure that it's nanite because this is quite a lot of polygons. And I'm going to apply some distribution map. So in the next and final part, I'm going to go over the final settings for the forest tools objects, the final settings of the material for the clips, the final settings of the lighting in the scene, and the final camera and rendering settings with you. So thank you guys for watching and see you next time.